The second module of the Human Capital Framework is around recruiting and hiring. Let's take a look at what district practices might be improved to ensure that you're recruiting the best and brightest candidates for your district. The recruiting and hiring processes are very important when it comes to human capital. In this module, we will delve further into interview processes, timeline management, as well as messaging and closing candidates. This will help you assess whether you build a comprehensive recruiting strategy that starts with recruiting, moves on to selecting, and finally hiring the best candidates possible. Hiring the right talent in the first place makes managing human capital in a district a more simple task. When we talk about recruiting and hiring, we like to speak to this framework. The first step is recruiting, making sure you are reaching the right talent. The second step is interviewing. Stretch interviews beyond conventional questions and get to know your candidates. The third piece is selecting. Remember to screen for motivation to work in the education sector. The fourth step is selling. Do you close the right candidates by explaining the value of working in your district? And finally, the last step is hiring. We want to make sure that you are hiring for long-term success in the district and in the education field. Let's dive into the first step, recruiting. When we talk about recruiting and reaching the right candidates, we typically talk about hiring internally or externally. We found that there is no uniform answer as to whether to select internally or externally, but it does tend to be easier to have information on internal candidates. There are several advantages to hiring internally. The recruiting process is lower cost. It motivates other candidates by showing an upward path within the organization. You're able to offer a more thorough assessment opportunity, and it allows for a greater focus when you do decide to hire externally. However, hiring internally also comes with its disadvantages. You're increasing the risk of maintaining the status quo by not bringing in the outside perspective. It may cause resentment among those who are not promoted as they look at those who are. It may elicit political jockeying within the organization, and it will not be effective without a strong performance management program, another piece of the human capital framework. Hiring externally comes with its advantages as well. It infuses the district with new blood. Its recruiting could be cheaper than ongoing development, and it opens a larger pool to ensure you're getting the best candidates. However, hiring externally comes with a series of disadvantages as well, as new hires have to get up to speed. They're not used to the culture. As a result, that may require longer lead time. Hiring externally also leads to organizational pressure to hire early, and thus more actively manage your pipeline. And there's always a higher risk of someone not fitting in within the district. Long story short, having a blend of internal and external candidates is the best option. The second piece of the recruiting and hiring process in the human capital framework is interviewing. Broadening the interview format can yield more predictive insight on a candidate's ability. There are 4 ways that the interview format may be broadened. The first is giving a realistic job preview. The second is conducting a deep dive into past experiences. The third is actively assessing the interest of candidates. And the fourth is conducting motivational profiling. A job preview serves a more informational role in giving applicants a real taste of the job. Through a realistic job preview, candidates are able to determine whether it will motivate them and whether they will therefore stay in it long term. A great job preview gives candidates an up-close view of the job's true dimensions. What's easy, what's demanding, and what's good and what's bad about it. A great job preview also focuses in particular on aspects of the job that cannot easily be communicated otherwise. And lastly, a good job preview is typically used before the final interview and selection to weed out candidates who decide the job is not for them. Job previews may take the form of shadowing an existing position occupant, watching the videotape of a classroom or meeting, meeting other employees, etc. Deep diving into past experiences is another way to broaden the interview format. A candidate's history can be a predictor of future success and should be considered during interviews and selection. However, it is important to not only stick with conventional questions, but to push further into the deep dive questions. For instance, instead of asking, "Why are you leaving your current position?" a relatively straightforward answer, you might ask, "What have been your favorite and least favorite aspects of each job you've held?" This might give you a greater picture of the candidate themselves and what they value and value less. Other examples of conventional questions are things like, "Tell us more about your major accomplishments." "What are your main responsibilities in your current position?" "What courses have you taken?" Instead of asking these, tend to ask more probing questions. For instance, when was the time you went above and beyond? This will illustrate behavioral aptitudes. Another deep dive question example is, how do you spend the majority of your time in your current position? Tells you a lot more than what their responsibilities are that may be included in the job description. Lastly, another example of a deep dive question. What courses or continuing education would you like to take over the next few years? Now, not only will they have to talk about what they've done in the past, but you'll learn about their future aspirational goals. The third aspect of broadening the interview format is assessing a candidate's level of interest. You can assess a candidate's level of interest without even asking any questions. A candidate's behavior alone during the interview process may provide a clear indication of his or her level of interest in the position. As you are moving a candidate through your recruiting and hiring process, think to yourself, does the candidate respond promptly to scheduling the interviews? Does the candidate follow up afterwards? Does the candidate show interest in the district's vision, theory of action, and priorities? Does the candidate demonstrate that they've researched the district in its recent initiatives? Is the candidate knowledgeable of your current challenges? And finally, does the candidate take it upon him or herself to reach out to others in the district who could offer insight about the position? Make sure to not only think through these questions, but formally document them for use during the selection process. The last piece of broadening the interview format may include assessing a candidate's motivation. A candidate's motivation may be assessed informally through questions, or more formally through motivational assessment tools. These tools may come from varying providers, use varying methods, and are available at varying cost. 3 prominent motivational profiling tools are the Myers-Briggs test, which is just a personal inventory to assess psychological preferences. A second tool is the DISC tool, a personal assessment used to improve work productivity, teamwork, and communication, and enables you to see behavioral differences. The last motivational profiling tool discussed here is the predictive index, another management tool used to assess individual needs and what drives individuals. Once interviews are complete, it is time to select candidates for the position. Both motivation and ability should be utilized to evaluate candidates once all data is collected. The recommended first step is to utilize the motivation level rubric outlined on this slide to determine a candidate's motivation score. A candidate's motivation score may be rated 1 to 5, and may span from passive, i.e., no interest in the job, to adequate, strong, great, or superb. Superb is defined as the candidate will meet any challenge to accomplish the job and to self-improve. After utilizing the motivation level rubric, it is important to move on to assess ability. As a result, step 2 is the fact that data around performance on the skill-based elements of the interview protocol should be collected based on activities such as shadowing an existing position occupant, watching the videotape of classroom or a meeting, meeting with other employees in the district, or demonstrating a lesson. When motivation and ability have both been rated, it's important to plot candidates along a grid to see which ones will be most successful in the job. Success in any job will follow only if the candidates selected are able both to do the job well and are motivated to do it. The motivation score should be used in conjunction with performance on the skill-based elements of the interview protocol. On this slide is depicted a sample 2x2. This will help you understand whether a candidate is not suitable for a considered role, if they have low motivation and low ability. If a candidate has high motivation and low ability, they may not be suitable for the considered role, but their abilities could potentially be developed. On the flip side, if a candidate has low motivation but high ability, the candidate may not be suitable for the considered role, but may be motivated in the current or another role. And finally, the candidates who should most be considered to be hired are those with high motivation and high ability. These candidates are said to be ideally suited for the considered role. Contrary to popular belief, the recruiting and hiring process does not end with the selection and extension of an offer to a candidate. Rather, school districts should increase their focus on selling or closing an ideal candidate. The process of convincing the best candidates to join a school district is referred to as closing or selling a candidate. There are many tactics on how to do this. Some examples include putting the candidate in touch with high-performing peers who may be able to indicate how the position has helped him or her grow. A second option is to ask the candidates what they are looking for in a job and respond in a way that showcases how this district specifically can fulfill those needs. A third tactic for closing candidates is allowing district leadership or direct supervisors to meet one-on-one with the candidate to discuss any reservations the candidate may have about the position. A fourth tactic for closing candidates is to provide the candidate with ample time to make the decision to join the district or to take the new position. And lastly, another tactic for closing candidates is to enable direct supervisors and peers to utilize information documented and collected during the interview process to cater conversations around opportunities for growth. It is important to remember that during the selling or closing of a candidate, each of the tactics outlined above provide an opportunity to shape the district's message. This is the end of the recruiting and selection chapter of the Human Capital Framework. Module 3 is around induction.